just another quiet morning near the border until it wasn't. For weeks, this stretch of eastern Ukraine had seen a strange silence. No airstrikes, no missile alerts, no new offensives. Russian forces were shifting their focus elsewhere, redeploying east of Kharkiv, while Western analysts speculated Ukraine was preparing something, but no one expected this. Not today, not in this way. Roughly 4 miles from the hangars, local villagers had gone about their routines, milking cows, sweeping porches, kids walking to school. They had no idea history was about to scream overhead at 600 miles per hour. What looked like a rusting Soviet-era fighter was in fact the centerpiece of an operation so unconventional, so unthinkable, that even NATO officials weren't briefed until hours later. The mission didn't come from a war room filled with polished brass and glowing maps. It came from a small, dim-lit command center patched together with extension cords and sandbags. And it was born from frustration. Ukraine had struck Russian ammo dumps, rail yards, even air bases, but never this. The target? A site no Ukrainian aircraft had ever dared to touch. A location so sensitive, even discussing it on open channels was forbidden. In 13 minutes, that MiG-29 would cross the Dnipro River and vanish from radar. And in just under 45 minutes, the very heart of Russia's internal security empire would be on fire. This wasn't just an airstrike. It was a message, a challenge, a shot fired straight into the myth of invulnerability. And it began right here. The target wasn't a warehouse. It wasn't a convoy. It wasn't even a military base. It was the Federal Security Service, FSB, headquarters in Glovo, a fortified compound just 3.1 miles from the Ukrainian border in Russia's Belgorod Oblast. It wasn't just a high-value asset, it was sacred ground to the Kremlin. A place where intelligence operations were planned, dissidents were monitored, and hybrid warfare was born. For over a decade, Western analysts had drawn invisible circles around sites like Glovo. These were considered untouchable zones, too politically sensitive, too well-defended, and too dangerous to engage. Not because they were impossible to reach, but because the consequences of doing so were deemed unpredictable. A direct strike on the FSB wasn't just an attack on infrastructure, it was a direct assault on the soul of Putin's state security apparatus. That's what made the mission so audacious. To get there, the pilot would have to fly a nearly 60-mile route at treetop level, dodging power lines, towers, and terrain. Then he'd have to pull a nearly vertical climb to 16,400 feet just to get the proper release parameters for the French-made AASM bombs bolted beneath his wings bombs. The MiG-29 was never designed to carry, and he'd have to do it all in under 7 minutes, with Russian S-400 air defense systems tracking every possible corridor of attack. No backup, no real-time satellite feed, no second chances. Ukraine knew exactly what it was doing, betting everything on speed, surprise, and sheer defiance. It wasn't just a strike. It was the military equivalent of walking into the enemy's cathedral and lighting it on fire. Not because it was easy, but because it was forbidden. And Ukraine had just broken that unspoken rule. To pull off an attack like this against a target as protected and symbolic as the FSB, Ukraine couldn't rely on brute force. It needed ingenuity. And what it brought to the fight was a Frankenstein machine born from desperation, brilliance, and battlefield creativity. At the heart of the mission was a MiG-29 Fulcrum, a fourth-generation Soviet fighter first flown in the early 1980s. Rugged, fast, and reliable, but hopelessly outdated by modern standards. Its original avionics couldn't process GPS signals. Its weapon system wasn't designed to interface with NATO equipment. And its targeting computer, if you could even call it that, was built in an era when floppy disks were cutting edge. Yet somehow, this aging relic was carrying 2 French-made AASM hammer bombs, each weighing over 550 pounds, and capable of hitting within 3 feet of a designated target from up to 44 miles away. These precision-guided munitions combined inertial navigation, GPS, and a solid fuel rocket booster to transform a simple bomb into a smart missile. But the MiG couldn't talk to the bombs, so Ukrainian engineers improvised. They built custom pylons in underground workshops, fitted with GPS antennas bolted to the forward fuselage. Power lines were routed manually through access panels never meant to be opened. and in place of an integrated fire control system, they taped an iPad to the instrument panel running homemade software that translated modern digital coordinates into Soviet-readable language. It was messy. It was insane. But it worked. This wasn't a clean integration. It was a jury-rigged alliance of Western technology, Soviet engineering, and Ukrainian willpower held together with zip ties, duct tape, and a deep understanding that survival demanded innovation. Because when you're fighting with hand-me-downs, creativity becomes your most lethal weapon. With the bombs armed, coordinates loaded, and that duct-taped iPad glowing faintly in the dim cockpit light, the MiG-29 thundered off the runway and dropped to a nerve-rattling 165 feet above ground level. At that altitude, one wrong move-on-miss tree line or power pole meant death. But it was the only way to stay invisible. The pilot's path was a winding, carefully pre-planned route that hugged the folds of the Ukrainian countryside, threading between towns, rivers, and ridgelines. His target lay just under 60 miles away, but the real challenge wasn't distance, it was the margin for error. He had none. The fulcrum shook and shuddered in the dense, low-level air. Every bump and pocket of turbulence translated into violent lurches. The stick required constant micro-adjustments to avoid terrain, towers, and the occasional grain silo. Navigation had to be dead on. At that height, GPS errors or map misreads weren't just inconvenient, they were lethal. Making matters worse, Russian S-400 systems just across the border could track targets from up to 250 miles away, but only if they could see them. By flying this low, the pilot was exploiting the curvature of the Earth itself. At 165 feet, radar horizon drops to just about 15.5 miles, buying him precious minutes of stealth. But all of that would end the moment he began his climb. That maneuver straight up into enemy radar would be the equivalent of lighting a flare on a dark highway. Every Russian screen from Kursk to Voronezh would light up. Still, for now, he was a ghost racing through wheat fields, threading valleys, pushing man and machine to their limits. It was the kind of flying most pilots trained for, but almost none ever attempted in real combat, until now. At exactly 6:22 a.m., with just 3.7 miles to target, the MiG-29 reached its initial point. The pilot took a breath, tightened his grip on the stick, and pulled hard. The nose pitched up at a sharp 45-degree angle, and the altimeter spun upward like a roulette wheel 1,000 feet, 5,000, 10,000, climbing fast. Every radar in western Russia lit up at once. Within seconds, the aircraft's warning system screamed to life. Russian 92N 6 gravestone fire control radars had locked on. S-400 batteries near Belgorod and Kursk were tracking the MiG's trajectory, calculating intercept solutions. On their screens, a low-flying ghost had just become a bright red target. The pilot had about 20 seconds, no more. His iPad display flashed optimal launch. He steadied the jet, centered the crosshairs, and pressed the release. Two deep thuds echoed through the airframe. The AASM hammers dropped clean from their pylons, instantly activating their GPS and inertial systems. He didn't wait to watch. In a single motion, the pilot rolled inverted and yanked the stick, executing a diving turn that pushed his body into the seat at over 6 Gs. The MiG hurtled back toward the Earth, bleeding altitude and punching through morning air like a missile itself. Behind him, the bombs had already begun their guided flight toward the FSB compound. Back at 150 feet, the pilot leveled off, weaving left and right to break any radar lock. Moments later, two 48N6 interceptor missiles roared past too high, too late. The Russians had fired, but they had missed. As the MiG-29 vanished back below radar coverage, the two French-made AASM hammer bombs were already executing their mission with ruthless precision. Each bomb weighed just over 550 pounds, but carried the power of a missile and the brain of a supercomputer. Upon release, small stabilizing fins deployed, and within seconds, their solid-fuel rocket boosters ignited, accelerating them to nearly Mach 0.8. The bombs weren't just falling, they were flying. Their guidance relied on a triple redundant system. First, inertial navigation, using internal gyroscopes to measure movement and angle. Second, military-grade GPS, providing satellite lock from 12,500 miles above Earth. And third, a backup logic system that allowed the bombs to continue their flight even if GPS signals were jammed. This wasn't theoretical. Russia's electronic warfare units were known for their aggressive GPS denial capabilities, but the AASM was built for that. Even in a fully jammed environment, the inertial system alone could still guide the bomb within 30 feet of its target. And this wasn't a straight drop. The bombs made hundreds of micro adjustments per second, correcting for wind, humidity, and angle. Their control fins could adjust 50 times a second, allowing mid-flight course changes, sudden turns, even curve-back trajectories if needed. At their final dive phase over 26,000 feet above Globov, onboard computer calculated speed, angle, and air resistance to determine the precise moment of detonation. The shaped charge was programmed for maximum penetration before exploding. Two bombs, acting independently, yet in perfect synchrony toward the same compound that had orchestrated years of cyber war, sabotage, and political terror. This wasn't just a strike. It was surgical vengeance at supersonic speed. At 6:27 a.m., just 23 seconds apart, the two AASM hammer bombs reached their terminal phase, diving nearly straight down at over 820 feet per second. The first bomb struck the roof of the FSB headquarters in Glovo, dead center. Its shaped charge warhead, designed to cut through fortified concrete, ignited on a 0.025-second delay, just long enough to penetrate 2 floors before detonation. The explosion created a molten jet of copper that sliced through steel beams and floor slabs with surgical force. A wave of overpressure surged outward at more than 26,000 feet per second, crushing everything in its path. The second bomb followed 0.3 seconds later, impacting 70 feet from the first, targeting a load-bearing section of the west wing. By then, the building's structural integrity was already compromised. The second detonation amplified the collapse effect, triggering what engineers call a progressive structural failure. Floor by floor, the building imploded inward. The fifth level pancaked the fourth. The fourth slammed the third. In less than 6 seconds, the 5-story building became a mound of rubble and twisted rebar. Inside, chaos turned instantly to silence. Over 40 FSB officers, analysts, and technical staff were killed instantly. Secure archives, server rooms, and communications gear were obliterated. Dozens of sensitive operations, some active in Kyiv, some in Berlin, vanished in a plume of fire and concrete dust. But the damage went beyond physical. Russia's domestic intelligence nerve centers, believed untouchable, had just been neutralized in under a minute. Internal networks went dark. Command protocols scrambled. Response teams paralyzed. The building didn't just fall. The myth around it collapsed too. As the smoke settled over Glovo, the implications of the strike echoed far louder than the explosions themselves. This wasn't just a tactical hit, it was a strategic earthquake. For the first time in the war, Ukraine had struck deep into the heart of Russia's intelligence machine, not with hypersonic missiles or stealth bombers, but with a 40-year-old Soviet jet. French bombs, American GPS, and Ukrainian software run from a taped-down iPad. It was a message written in hardware and defiance, delivered with surgical precision. To Moscow, the message was unmistakable. There are no more safe zones. The myth of invulnerability that once cloaked the Russian state's inner sanctums had been shattered. The FSB, Putin's former agency, and one of his most trusted instruments of internal control, had been brought to its knees not by NATO, not by sanctions, but by ingenuity from the very country it sought to dominate. More than that, the operation marked a turning point in modern warfare. No longer was power measured solely in fleets or squadrons. This was the dawn of composite warfare, where battlefield improvisation, digital workarounds, and asymmetric tactics could humiliate a superpower. Ukraine had shown the world that with the right mix of old hardware and new thinking, a nation could punch far above its weight. Military planners across Europe and beyond took notice. The rules had changed. What mattered now wasn't what equipment you had, but how cleverly you could combine it. And as Ukraine